right, welcome to a Rogue Tech guide. This one's going to be very much focused on new players. So, obviously, you need to have the core base game because you can't install a mod for a game you don't have. At least not with any expectation for it to work. The DLCs for the BattleTech, the what was it, 2016 Harebrained Schemes release BattleTech. It's available on GOG and Steam. I personally use the GOG, good old games, GOG.com, just because I prefer not dealing with having to have Steam running to play games. But you don't need the DLC for the mods. However, they do add more content and more things to even the modded BattleTech, Rogue Tech experience. So you have to start with installing, preferably a fresh install of BattleTech and whatever mods you have and want to use. Then you head to the Rogue Tech Discord, which you'll find a link in the description. And in the updates and news section here, you'll see the most recent launcher. They were hosting it on Mods in Exile, but yeah, at some point they just started dropping the links to the Rogue launcher into the updates and news Discord of the Rogue Tech official Discord. So you just click on that, and when you click on that, yeah, you continue to download. It downloads, and go ahead and give me a second. Yeah, so when you open it, it will pop up the Windows Protect Your PC dialog if you're running Windows, and you just need to click Run anyway. I'm not going to because I already have it installed, but yeah. You can run it from your downloads folder, although I would recommend moving it to your BattleTech install folder just to keep your, disks all organized and everything. It will add files to whatever location you're running it from, and if at any point you move it, you're going to have to reinstall the mod packet. So just ideally put it wherever you want to have initially your launcher for the Rogue Tech mod. So, all right. So once you have again downloaded it and moved it preferably to your BattleTech folder, you will see the Rogue Launcher icon with the Rogue Tech or the Rogue Launcher executable application with the icon there. Generally, it's a good idea to go ahead and go into compatibility and just run as administrator right there. It helps a little bit with dealing with some Windows stuff. I've been using the Rogue Tech mod for years now and have never had an issue. The modders have always been, very upfront and very, very trustworthy. So I will absolutely vouch for them. It is safe to run their mod launcher. Just make sure you get it from the official Rogue Tech Discord. If you get it somewhere else, for example, the Nexus mods download does not work anymore because of falling out between Nexus and a lot of actually modders in the mod community. The short version is Nexus mods claimed ownership of everything uploaded to their service, and most modders don't like that. So yeah, go to the official Discord, download it, move it to your BattleTech folder, and then set it as administrator. All right, so when you launch the launcher, you will get greeted by this interface. You need to use the launcher to actually launch Rogue Tech. So go ahead and make a shortcut from the Rogue Launcher file to wherever you like to click to launch your games. Personally, I have it pinned to the start menu because I launch Rogue Tech a lot. But you'll see a install target, which is going to be your BattleTech folder /mods. And the checkout workspace is going to be where all of the data that you need for Rogue Tech will be installed. It's a lot. Actually, I can tell you right now, at present, with the current patch, it is... give it a second to calculate. So at present, the Rogue Tech mod cache is 78.5 gigabytes and 102,000 files. It's a lot. But there's so much content. They've expanded the game so much that it's very much reasonable. But anyway, once you click Update Install RogueTech, you will have a long process. And obviously it's faster if you already have the mod installed. But even so, just updating it will take a while. Alright, and once it's done installing or updating, you'll get a little message there. And if it's your first install, it will pop this up automatically, but otherwise you have to just update to get to it. And this is the configuration. So the online war map is going to be outside of the scope of this video. It specifically the Discord for the online war. You can literally see whenever you hover it. Roguewar.org will tell you how to join, and there's an entire process to register and be vetted and be authorized to impact the online war map. But the difference that's worth noting is the online war map, the entire map changes based on player activity during the current season. Wartech 2C is just always the offline, like you don't need online, you don't need to worry about other players. It's just, yeah, it lets you work on, or play without being impacted by the online war, which is most noteworthy because you can very easily with the online war map end up, if you play and then pass a couple days and then play again, the planet you're on could suddenly not be controlled by the faction you were fighting for, and it can mess up some of your plans and put you in a situation where you maybe don't have any great contracts to run, blah, 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 blah. It's just, Wartech 2C is better for anyone who doesn't want to actively take part in the online war, although the online war map does allow access to the online war stores, which are very, very full of interesting and good things. But the online war is an entirely different discussion. So, again, beyond the scope of this particular video. So, Wartech 2C is the one we're going to look at right now. Well, I mean, we're not even going in the game, so... but Wartech 2C is what I'll currently be selected. And that's also what I play the challenge run videos, the playthroughs on. Again, just so that I don't suddenly have the planet I'm on change drastically or anything. The Wartech 2C map, you can choose 3040s or 3080s. The biggest difference is the invasion of the clans. So 3080s, you'll have clan planets closer to the heart of the inner sphere, whereas 3040s, you have to travel quite a way to get to clan planets. The difficulty scaling, I highly recommend for newer players to go with planet rating, because if you have company strength of, let's say, 4 skulls or 4 stars of company rating, you're basically limited to 4 skull or, close to 4 skull missions. But if you get banged up really bad, you might need to retreat to a lower rated planet to just play some, milk runs, get some C-bills in your coffers, and maybe replace some equipment you lost. So planet rating is more forgiving, and you have more control over what difficulty of missions you are facing. I specifically have to use the planet rating difficulty for my challenge runs, because if I was playing with company strength, I would pretty much have to have an entire lance of strong mechs that I just never used to be able to drop on double or triple or whatever the rating. So by doing planet rating, I can go to a 3-skull planet with a 1-star lance and play 3-skull missions with a 1-star lance. So that's why I use planet rating, but very much recommend planet rating for any new players. Support lances. So support lances add an extra element of randomness, and it is modified by the difference between your rating and the difficulty of the mission. So if you drop on a 1-skull mission with a 5-star lance, you're going to face support lances. unless you have them disabled. Again, for my challenge runs, I have them disabled, so there's a little bit more consistency on the missions I drop on, because otherwise, if I drop in a 1-star lance on a 3-skull mission and there's 2 enemy support lances, I just get destroyed, and the playthrough ends. But, yeah, the hovering over, so easy enemy support lances is maximum of 1, and lower chances. But again, modified by the delta between your lance rating and the skull rating of the mission. Kill Team's enemy support lances is maximum 1 support lance, but the mechs that they drop as a support lance are very powerful. And default enemy support lances is standard mechs that are dropped as support lances, but there's up to 2 of them. Again, modified by the delta between your lance rating and the difficulty of the mission. I very highly recommend going with no support lances if you're very new to Rogue Tech, and if you're watching this guide to learn how to install it, you're probably new to Rogue Tech, so definitely go no enemy support lances. It'll just save you a lot of grief of dropping on a mission, getting completely wrecked, and not realizing what you could have possibly done to not get wrecked. The spawn randomizer, so the base game of BattleTech by Harebrained Schemes, you always drop in the same place on every map, and the enemies always drop in the same place on every map. That's what disable random combat starting positions does. So, I do the random combat starting position. It just adds a lot more variation, and if you've put hundreds of hours into the game, dropping in the same place, knowing exactly where your enemies are, and being able to proceed the same way through the mission every time is very repetitive. It gets dull. So it doesn't. Random combat starting position does not increase the difficulty at all. It just is a thing. It's just a preference thing. So if you want to always drop in the same position, you can disable random, whatever. Battle deployments. So automatic deployment is stock standard BattleTech. You start the game with your mechs on the ground. They drop in automatically. You get no input. Ask for deploy. This is actually a newer option. I'm not super familiar with it, but I'm assuming, based on the name of it, that it's an automatic deployment, but before it actually drops to the automatic position, it'll ask you if you want to. And then manual deploy is what I just stick with, so I can manually deploy my mechs where I want on the battlefield. Control convoys. If you want the AI to drive forward with the convoys and potentially put themselves in bad positions to get killed, go with AI. But if you want to actually control the convoys and maybe make them make smarter moves and target smarter enemies, the manual convoys for you. The Harebrained Schemes maps are a little bit small for large-scale war. It was fine for dropping a single lance, usually against a single lance. But with Rogue Tech, you're dropping up to 3 lances, 2 lances of mechs, 1 lance of vehicles. So, yeah, the standard map size is quite small when there's 3 lances on your side, plus potentially an ally lance, plus potentially several lances on the enemy side, etc., etc. Just at least 33% increased map size is pretty important. If you do go with the 100% increase, that does double the play area, which means if you have an enemy hover tank that decides to run away from you, you might be chasing it for a long, long time. I honestly feel like 33% is just spot on perfect for most battles. You don't really feel cramped. But yeah, you can very much, especially if you like the artillery playstyle, you can go for insanely large maps and just lob ordnance across the map at the enemies. Allies, literally what you would think it does. Either you sometimes get allies on missions or you don't. There's no guarantee and no way to control whether or not you get allies, but from what I've seen, enabling allies does, especially early game, ensure that you get allies almost every mission, which they add some firepower potentially if they're dropped in a good position. The ally drop is completely randomized. So if they drop in a bad position, they mill about doing about nothing. And if they drop in a great position, they soak a lot of fire and give you a lot of additional damage you wouldn't have had. I personally don't like it, in part because it does mean that you have less control over the salvage available, because if your allies just blow a mech to pieces that you wanted to salvage or salvage components from, that's just gone. I also disable it because I have support lances disabled, so if you have support lances on, you might want to consider allies just to even the playing field a little bit. The combat log toggle, I recommend going with floaties, in part because the combat log, while it's interesting to be able to look at it and see exactly what happened and exactly the order of things happening and everything, it does cause a performance hit, and you have to click on the combat log to see what's going on. So the floaties lets you just get the majority of the information you need in a timely manner without having to go and click on the log and look at what happened and then close the log and continue playing. So very much recommend floaties. Some people probably prefer the combat log. I'm not one of them. Moving on. The random generated starting pilots versus random Ronin starting pilots. The Ronin pilots are just a assortment of unique mech warriors and vehicle pilots. They have usually more and better perks or quirks or whatever you want to call them. They are based on the variety of rogue tech mech warriors that have been added. You've got Kamea, Lady Urano. You've got some rogue tech modders, etc., etc. Generated starting pilots are those stock standard. You can change their portrait. You can change their call sign. They usually have very few skills. But if you want to completely customize your starting mech warriors, that's probably the only situation where I would recommend going with the random generated. They will be, just keep in mind, they will be objectively worse than if you started with Ronins. One benefit, though, is they do cost less upkeep per financial report. So that is the one benefit other than the customization. Concrete Jungle, I keep that disabled because you could be walking through an urban battle and all of a sudden have a massive explosion strike your mechs, or have infantry that are in the buildings shooting you that you have to destroy the buildings before you get to the actual mission, or potentially during the actual mission, like while you have the enemy mechs shooting you, you happen to get a little too close to a building and start getting hit by, infantry mortars or whatever. So I just keep it disabled. I not really a fan of the randomness of all of a sudden the urban map is a nightmare. The era units, the more you enable, the more basically just variety of mechs you'll see. You can disable them if you just want a smaller selection of mechs. These do enable the mechs for both you and the enemy forces. But it's fun. And yeah, they're all lore-specific mechs. Then you have the optional mods. Urbocalypse, urban mechs. I love urban mechs, so I always have it enabled because there are some fun urbies. But you don't... if you want a wider variety of early game light mechs, keep it disabled. If you just want to see what all is out there in Rogue Tech, then just keep it disabled so you have a larger variety of different early game light mechs and things. But it just makes urban mechs more common and more varied. The custom Omnimechs, I'm not using Omnimechs in my challenge run. So I have it disabled in part just so I don't get as many Omnimechs against me because I can't salvage them. Or I can, but I can't use them. So I keep that disabled specifically for the challenge run. If you want more Omnimechs, in case you don't know, Omnimechs are mechs that have essentially built-in components like their engine core, etc., which makes them easier to repair, cheaper to repair, and refit time is much lower. You can just swap weapons very easily. But do keep in mind, again, anything you enable here is enabled for your enemies as well. Pirate tech is quirky. I like pirate tech. It's fun. Some people, not so much. You do see some crazy stuff, like the Mech Lab Monday I just released had a pirate vehicle that was overheating my mechs in a single alpha strike. Not great, but it's fun. There's a lot of pirate tech that is just really fun and funny to use. Like the MRM 40 pirate, where you can fire up to 120 missiles in one turn. It just might explode when you do. Elite pilots and mechs, I would definitely keep that unchecked if you're new to Rogue Tech, because these mech warriors are extremely lethal. Their mechs are insanely powerful, very much min-maxed, and the pilots themselves have higher ratings and more quirks than your mech warriors can possibly have. So you're always going to be at a disadvantage when you face the elite mechs and pilots, so just, if you're new, don't enable that. Risk equipment is objectively the best equipment in the game. If you have it enabled, it basically makes everything else obsolete. So I keep it disabled because the challenge rate, or the lance rating of your mechs doesn't increase enough based on what the risk weaponry does. So I keep it disabled. Rogue Society also very much, the risk does usually have like a jam chance or something to kind of balance it. The Society stuff does not. It's just broken. It's flat out. If you get a bunch of Society gear, you will just roll over the opposition that you were just struggling against before you got it. Super Heavies. These are mechs over 100 tons. And yeah, there's actually lore in the Battletech universe for mechs over 100 ton. And they're very fun. They're very challenging. You can face some crazy, scary stuff. Probably not a big deal. Every mission where you're going to face super heavies do have a warning on the mission. So if you're not late game, min-maxed out, and have your best builds possible, you can just avoid the missions that say, warning, whatever. Nukes. Do not enable nukes. Literally can one-shot your entire lance. I don't understand how anyone could enjoy them, but some people do. I do not. Don't. Just, if you're not used to and extremely good at Rogue Tech, just don't turn on nukes. Experimental weapons is fun. There's crazy prototype stuff. It's like Pirate Tech. Some of it's quirky. There's usually trade-offs for using them. Quicksell, same thing. Except the other side. Instead of being experimental, high-tech, fancy things, it's janky, cheap, like knockoff stuff. But it's very fun. I do recommend avoiding the Quicksell custom mechs option, because this will make anything in the periphery, any factions in the periphery specifically, but like local government and some Intersphere battles, have mechs that are just full of Quicksell equipment. And it can clutter your loot pool with stuff you have no interest in, and mechs that you probably don't want to build. Those two you can just enable or disable as you like. Cracking good time. Squid Game flashpoints. Yes, you can have mech warriors just get killed outside of battle with very little control. I am not ever going to enable that, but some people enjoy it, so okay. Operation Revival, I'm actually not sure what that is. I have not played with it, and if I remember correctly, it is a fairly new edition. But yeah, I don't know. Try it if you want. It's probably flashpoints. Maybe. Not sure. In any case, flashpoints and stories. All of them are fun. Just all of them are fun. And you can just opt in or opt out. So you can go start a flashpoint, and if you decide you don't like it, you just don't have to do it again. The more flashpoints there are, the less likely you're going to get the more boring flashpoints like gladiator battles or whatever. And yeah, even if you've played through the BattleTech original campaign, the vanilla story mode, the Arano Restoration flashpoints actually add on to those and change them to follow the RogueTech rules, and quite fun. Very fun. I played them during my last playthrough, the Challenge Run Mark II, but I'm not going to touch them again moving forward, just partially because it's hard to drop with mechs and just lower skull ratings, so my Challenge Run rules are going to make them considerably less fun, especially since several of the missions you're just given mechs, and yeah. Anyway, moving on. Hireable Ronin. This is just additional unique mech warriors that you can find and hire. I like them. I keep them. Emblem options. This is entirely just options for you to choose an emblem for your mech warrior mercenary company. I like them. They're fun. Whatever. Portrait loader. Same thing, but for commanders. The commander portrait. This just gives you a lot more options. Once you start the game, they don't have any more impact on the game, so it's kind of it's personal preference. Evacuated cities. Civilians didn't evacuate or civilians evacuated. I am not a big fan of, collateral damage and the horrors of war, so I keep it where civilians evacuated. Just personal preference. Updated fire effects versus original. I personally think that the RogueTech ones are much nicer. But you can try it either way. It's just a visual change. Fog of War. This is actually a fairly massive change. So, if you have Fog of War stays revealed, it means once you spot an enemy, you don't have to worry about not spotting them in Fog of War anymore. Whereas, on a unit basis, if you are not close, you actually lose hit chance on enemies that are obscured by the Fog of War. I think it adds tactical depth, so I keep it enabled. Night Vision Overlay. This does not disable night missions. This just changes whether or not you get the green tint on your screen to show whether or not the mech has night vision enabled. I like it because it helps me remember which mechs have night vision and which ones do not. I am, on occasion, a goldfish. It's very helpful to get little reminders like that. Speed mod. One of the biggest complaints people had about the vanilla BattleTech experience was that everything moved so slow. This fixes that. You can actually bump it up all the way to 100% speed to make things zoom around like crazy. I personally think 50% is a nice sweet spot. It's quick enough that you get through things fairly quickly, but it's not so fast that you struggle to keep track of what's going on. And quality of life, skip intro, as it suggests. When you launch the game, you don't have to wait through the introductory cutscene. Use mouse 4 as escape key. You can just use your mouse to back out of things rather than pushing escape. I personally like pushing escape because I hate accidentally bumping my mouse button. Auto sorting. This is when you're in your mech bay, you will see your three rows of 6 mechs. This just sorts them. I like moving them around and putting them where I want, so I use no auto sorting. But if you want to not have to worry about it and just automatically have your heaviest mech at the top left and your lightest mech in the bottom right, then you can do that, etc., etc. FX options. Sound replacement pack, I think, sounds so much better than the vanilla game soundtrack, or not soundtrack, sounds. Like the laser fire and things are just so much better. Autocannons feel more impactful just based on the sounds. So, yeah. Skip travel cutscenes. It saves time. And traveling already takes time away from real life / the video I'm making, whatever. So I always skip travel. If you enjoy the, travel cutscene, if you just chill with it or whatever, keep it unchecked. Otherwise, if you just want to skip it and save some time, keep it checked. Crystal clear, obsolete, not even going to touch it. Silence, disable most ambient chatter. So whenever you hear the callouts in the Argo where, Darius is talking to whoever or whatever, you can just turn those off so that they don't happen. And Scorched Earth is you can see where the ground is struck by missiles and lasers and things. Last time I messed with it, it seemed to make the performance worse, in part because the game was keeping track of a lot of graphical little things all over the place. So I just keep it disabled. I feel like it doesn't add that much, but some people probably like it. Color floaties. I absolutely love the colored panic system floaties because if I am distracted and don't notice until after I see the color, I go, oh, hey, they're panicking. Cool. If they were not colored, I might catch them out of the corner of my eye and not immediately identify whether they're just, unsettled or panicking or whatever. So, more information is better. Keep colored panic systems enabled. Mech portraits, I don't like the photography style mech icons, but some people do. So, just literally pick whichever one you think looks better. You can try them both and decide. Tech and repair. So, either repair armor after battle, which is, the way Rogue Tech is designed, or free armor repair after battle. But it does lower your base mech tech points. So while you're not spending time repairing armor and spending money repairing armor, it does make literally everything else go slower. I personally think that repairing armor makes it more rewarding when you do really well in a mission and more interesting when you get your armor completely shaved off. Having 30, 40 days of repairs when you didn't even lose a component is fun and funny and interesting. Russia localization, self-explanatory. Mod tech, you have to install it. The cleaning the cache and removing old Rogue Tech saves. Again, if you're watching this video, you probably have never installed Rogue Tech, so you don't need either of those. And the performance fix, I skipped that for a second, the rendering for a second, but the performance fix absolutely helps. It makes the game more performant, very much so, very noticeably so. Definitely leave that enabled. And then the rendering, if you have a powerful processor, the multi-threaded rendering helps potentially. But if you don't have a powerful processor, you can run with default rendering, which helps things not stress your processor so much. However, the biggest bottleneck for Rogue Tech is the RAM because of the way Harebrained Schemes design the systems of BattleTech. So the modders have gone in and added a lot of content, have added a lot of additional, more in-depth systems. And unfortunately, because of the way the game was initially designed, that's a massive hit specifically to RAM. So generally, I would recommend 32 plus gigs of RAM for Rogue Tech for it to run smoothly, never crash, and generally have less insane load times. You can get away with 16 gigs of RAM, but do understand that you may crash from time to time and load times are going to be ridiculous. And if you have 8 gigs of RAM or less, probably not going to be able to actually play Rogue Tech. Probably. But then again, 8 gigs of RAM was barely enough to run the base vanilla game because of various performance issues that Harebrained Schemes left in. But that's aside from the point. The key thing here is the multi-thread rendering. If you have a decent processor, does help. It removes a little bit of the burden from other areas. And the Rogue Tech performance fix is, in my opinion, absolutely necessary to just save time and make things run smoother. And that's it. Once you click OK, You will have... Well, this is because I clicked reconfigure. Initial setup, when you first set it up, you're not going to have this pop up. So, yeah. I'm going to have it do this, and then I'm going to pop in game to go over the actual campaign options. So, yeah. Future me will do that right now. Alright, now that you have RogueTech installed, you should be able to start a new game and be greeted by this menu. So this is going to determine a lot of the factors for your playthrough that you can't change after this. So it's important to know what they do. Parts for mech assembly. So if you're familiar at all with the base game, this is how many pieces you need to salvage to be able to put together to get a new mech in your roster. Do keep in mind that unless you... Well, actually, I don't even think... Do keep in mind, whenever you put the pieces together in RogueTech, you do not get a pristine brand new mech full of equipment. The mech will be in a damaged state, based in part on your mech tech skill at the time, including which components are broken or not. The first check is the location specific check to see which locations are completely destroyed and which ones are not. Then for each location that is not completely destroyed, there's a role for each piece of equipment in that slot, for example, side torso, arm, or whatever, to see if that piece of equipment is destroyed, damaged, or in good working order. The default is 5, and you can go down to 3 to make the game a bit easier and have more access to mechs, or you can go all the way up to 8. Worth noting that the salvage availability is based on a further setting down here, but even with generous salvage, you will not be able to salvage a full mech if you have 8 parts for assembly. Whereas even without generous salvage, you should be able to salvage a mech with 3 parts on most missions, assuming you destroy the mech in such a way that it has all of its parts still available, which is largely just head destruction or engine crits. The company type determines where in space you start, as well as what units randomly are generated for you. So, if you start with a battle armor platoon, for example, you will not start with very many mechs, if any at all, depending on whether or not you choose a mech reward for your commander, but you'll start with battle armor units. Clans, you will start with clan units, etc., etc. The safest starts for a new player who just installed RogueTech for the first time would be the major Inner Sphere houses, which are Liao, Kurita, Steiner, Davian, and Merrick. You could also go with the mercenary start, where it's a completely random grab bag of mechs, but you have pretty good chances of getting at least a decent mech or 2. There's also the primitive starts, which the primitive the primitive clan start is especially interesting. It's going to be more challenging at the start, but you have a chance of starting with a primitive heavy as compared to most starts. Your largest mech is going to be a medium mech, and with the primitive mechs start, you'll be starting in Inner Sphere or periphery space, and you'll be able to potentially upgrade your primitive mechs very quickly with just standard equipment. But if you do the primitive clan start, you'll have access to clan tech almost immediately, and so you can make that heavy or, the medium mechs that you start with, even though they started as junker primitives, into very, very powerful mechs very quickly. But again, primitive starts are a larger challenge than standard starts, especially the Inner Sphere or mercenary start, and the primitive clan start is definitely one of the hardest to get rolling with, but once you do, it's pretty fair, pretty fine. Society start is another interesting start, in addition to the clan start, because you do start with society tech, which is some of the best, if not the best, equipment in the game. Solaris start, you're going to start with more like melee mechs and generally just kind of crazy stuff. Tortuga is the pirate start, so you start with pirate equipment, and pirate equipment usually is strange and can potentially explode. So there's that. Word of Blake and Comguard. That's what it's called. So those two are, you're going to have clan tech equipment, royal equipment, good quality equipment, and you'll be starting in Inner Sphere space rather than clan space, so they can also be pretty good starts for a new player. Although if you get damaged or lose a mech completely, you are set back much more than if you just start with the Inner Sphere house, one of the major houses. And the Comguard and Clan and Word of Blake starts generally have lower tonnage mechs, which have less armor and less structures. So if you're getting pounded and beaten, you usually are going to end up with more valuable equipment being lost. So that's why I recommend for new players to start with one of the Inner Sphere houses. Again, that's Liao, Merrick, Kurita, Steiner, and Davian. So those 5, future me has probably already put them up on the screen. But those are the safest bets for a smooth early game as you get the hang of the game. Friendly fire, very self-explanatory. Disabled means there's no friendly fire, so even if you're shooting past your mechs, there's no chance of accidentally hitting them in the back. Buildings only is you cannot accidentally hit a mech with stray shots, but you can hit buildings, which is interesting because it does potentially allow you to destroy a building that a mech is standing on or hiding behind to give your other units better line of sight or cause the mech to fall and take leg damage. But it also works the other way around. If you accidentally destroy a building that's keeping your mechs from getting shot at, then that can be problematic. Enemies only is the enemies can shoot themselves in the back, but you cannot. Enemies in TRL is neutral enemy forces, and neutral forces can hit each other with stray shots, but you cannot. And all, which is the default, and my personal preference, is anyone can accidentally shoot anyone if they're not careful with their shots. Mech recovery chance. The worthwhile note here is when your mech is destroyed with a center torso destruction specifically. Also, if you have an XL engine, you can, accidentally, or I'm pretty sure you can lose those as well. I'm not 100% on that. I know for a fact center torso destruction can result in the mech being lost. I think side torso, if you have an XL engine, can also result in the mech being lost. But other than that, you don't really have to worry about losing your mech. And if you eject, this mech recovery chance has 50% added to it. So, at base default level, you have a coin flip 50-50 of whether or not you're going to lose the mech chassis if you lose your center torso or whatever. But if you eject, if you tell your pilot to eject, you will guaranteed save the mech chassis. Whereas if you put it to 0%, then if your mech is seriously damaged and destroyed, you are guaranteed to lose it. And if you eject, you will have a 50-50 chance of keeping the chassis. So personally, I like to go with 50% or higher, just because I like the option to punch out and save the mech for sure. The contracted difficulty variance. So this is not the number of skulls, this is the number of half skulls. If you're playing with company rating difficulty, then this will allow you to take missions that are allegedly easier than your company rating would dictate, as well as slightly harder than your company rating would dictate, which is very important for being able to improve your company, rather than just always going with the same difficulty. Dropping it to 0 does make it so that every single mission is the same skull rating as your company or planet is rated. Whereas 5, which is the highest, means if you're using planet rating and you go to a planet that is a 4-skull planet, for example, just throwing one out, this is 5 steps in either direction. So it can allow the planet to be 1.5 to 6.5, because it would be 2.5 skulls variation. Yeah. Simple math. Oh boy. But contract difficulty variance of 5 means if you go to a 4-skull planet, you can have anything from a 1.5 skull mission generated all the way up to a 6.5. So generally, especially if you're a newer player, keeping it around the 2 or 3 mark is ideal, just to give you the ability to drop on an easier mission if you just got wrecked in the last one. Contract payment, very self-explanatory. How much are your contracts going to pay you? This is C-bills specifically, so generous means you get a lot more C-bills, and cheapskate means you get the minimum amount of C-bills for completing a mission. Salvage, likewise, very straightforward. Generous means you get more priority picks in random salvage. Stingy means you get less priority picks in random salvage. Commander experience points. This is just how many experience points your commander starts with. It has no bearing after the initial start of the run. So, that's that. Advanced Mech Warriors. So, as you progress, and as you go, to higher MRB ratings, which the Mercenary Review Board rating is just based on how many missions you've successfully completed thus far in the run. As the MRB rating increases, you'll start seeing more, if you have often, a lot more higher rated Mech Warriors in the hiring hall. And if you have rare, you're basically always going to see base level, unupgraded Mech Warriors in the hiring halls. Ronin hire chance. This is how many pilots or Mech Warriors at any given hiring hall are going to be Ronins. And the Ronins are the ones that have the special portrait, special abilities, generally just objectively better than the stock standard pilots. But you are able to change the standard pilot's portraits and call signs, I believe. So there's that. If you want stronger pilots, you can go with the higher Ronin chance. If you want more customizable Mech Warriors and pilots, then you can go with a lower chance for Ronin hires. Pilots per system, likewise, just how many Mech Warriors are in the hiring hall at any given system, all the way from 1 to 10. And this is largely just how many options you have to hire. If you do lose a lot of Mech Warriors and you have, less than 4 available to hire, you might have to bounce around between a couple different planets to replace the Mech Warriors you lost. That might not be a problem if you have plenty of C-bills saved up, but if you're close to bankruptcy, only having 1 pilot available to hire if you lose your entire lance is pretty much the end of the run. Mech Warrior progression is very straightforward. It's how much experience they gain for each mission. That's it. Obviously, you spend that experience on skills, which we'll get to those two in a second. But just the Mech Warrior progression is how much experience does dropping on a mission give you. The Mech Warrior multiplier is the more simple of the two when it comes to the exponent and the multiplier. And you can see the the formula is right there. So the base level cost, when you increase your rating, so if you go from Gunnery 2 to Gunnery 3, it's going to cost significantly less experience than going from Gunnery 9 to Gunnery 10. This multiplier multiplies all of those point costs by a standard amount. So you can, as it says, level your Mech Warriors up fast, or slow, or just standard. Mech Warrior Exponent is a little bit more tricky, because this increases the exponential rate of Mech Warrior level acquisition. So it's going to have less impact earlier and more impact later. So it will not significantly increase the the experience cost of going, for example, from Gunnery 2 to Gunnery 3. However, it will make the cost of going Gunnery 9 to Gunnery 10 insanely high. So if you just want to make it slightly easier or harder, that's the multiplier. And that will affect the entire progression of your Mech Warrior. Versus the exponent, where the early game it'll be comparable or slightly harder to level up your Mech Warriors, but at the end of the game, when you're getting to 9s and 10s and things, it will significantly change how much experience it takes to gain a level. Lethality, very straightforward. How likely are your mech warriors to die? You can choose never, half, normal, or lethal. I'll give you, I'll let you just guess what never and lethal mean. I have noticed with half, it feels like lethality's just not a thing. Worth noting, if you do put never, from my experience, if a mech warrior is bleeding out, they will eject rather than die. So if you ever want to have the option of getting in that last alpha strike and sacrificing your mech warrior for it, don't go never. And also, if you have never set, then they will destroy the head component of their mech when they punch out. So sometimes it's better to lose the meat than the equipment. Just saying. Starting money, self-explanatory. How many C-bills do you want to start your campaign with? After the initial start of the campaign, this has no bearing anymore. Mech bay speed and mech bay armor speed are just how long it takes to do things in the mech bay. Obviously, fastest means you don't need as much mech tech to get your mechs up and running after a mission. Hard means you'll need more mech tech to get them up in a timely manner. Armor speed is the same thing, but it only applies to repairing and adjusting armor amounts. It's worth noting that you can also, if you have the free armor repair enabled, this does almost nothing. At that point, it only affects when you change the armor on a mech rather than repairing the armor on a mech. And every battle you will take armor damage. So this is a much more constant benefit or hindrance, whereas the mech base speed, if you don't have your armor breached, if you don't have your structure exposed, your equipment exposed, getting crits and things, this could potentially just not matter between certain missions if you do well, and if you don't take too much damage and lose components or anything. Mech bay C-bills, just what you would think. How expensive is the mech bay? So, if you want to toe the line of bankruptcy, you can make it very expensive to repair your mechs, but it's a reasonable cost on normal. So putting it to cheap just makes it so you're almost never going to go bankrupt unless you very much make mistakes. And expensive means you're going to be feeling the pressure of those financial reports coming as soon as you take any damage in a mission. Then finally, you have shop selling price and scrap return values, both of which are just the percentage of money you get. So if you have the 5%, just to make the math, actually no, we'll just do 10% just to make the math easy. It does go all the way up to 18 from 5. But if you have it set to 10%, this means if you are selling or if you're scrapping a mech chassis that is worth 1 million C-bills with no equipment. So it's worth noting here, and yeah, I know I've been saying worth noting a lot. Disregard. So when you see the mech value, when you are hovering over the mech icon, it's going to show you the value of the mech with all of its stock standard equipment for that particular model. The scrap return value is the percentage of just the chassis, not the equipment. The Omni's vehicles and things they do include a little bit of the component values and stuff, but for the most part, it's just the actual chassis itself. So if the chassis itself were rated at, hypothetically, 1 million C-bills, 10% scrap return value would be you can scrap it for 100,000. And that's literally all this does, if you're scrapping chassis or vehicle parts. The shop selling price, this is a percentage that is then modified further by your reputation with whatever faction controls the planet. So if a faction hates you, well, if it hates you enough, you can't even use the shop to buy or sell. Actually, wait, can you sell? I think you can still sell. You just can't buy anything if they hate you. But regardless, the percentage return on selling equipment or, not destroyed chassis of mechs and things is based on this, in addition to how much the faction loves or hates you for the planet you're currently in. So if they absolutely adore you and you have it maxed out at 18%, you're going to get very lucrative, C-bill returns from selling equipment and fully stored mechs. 5% means, if they don't like you, you're going to get a pittance. But that is all of the setup for the general run. If you click Start Game here, it goes to Commander, Portrait Selection, and Background and stuff. I'm going to cover that in your First Weeks in Rogue Tech video. That should be coming probably Friday. Probably. But, yeah, keep your eyes on that. But for now, that's been your Rogue Tech guide for the day. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, have a good one.